All right. Um, so this is a case study that I have been wanting to share with you for a while, but we keep running out of time for the agenda, so I thought I would make a spot for it in this session. So we've had the privilege to hear about this project from the team who is responsible for creating it multiple times. Ryan, I think, is going to put in the chat a recording of Kent Patnode and Hugh Forrester, who were some of the key people who kind of made this project happen. So you can also hear from them, but I wanted to kind of share some of the things that we kind of learned from this project. So the building is called Moytel Lalem. It's located in New Westminster. So if you're familiar with the Lower Mainland, New Westminster is kind of down there in the little red area. So population of just over 80,000. And the project is really exciting. It was brought together through a partnership, and really this theme of partnership and collaboration is what makes this building such a special case study to talk about. So the key kind of players were the Aboriginal Land Trust, Luma Native Housing Society, who are doing some really wonderful and creative housing solutions in our region, and in partnership with Swahili Vision International Association. So I think what was really interesting about the partnership is that Luma Native Housing Society has been really developing their capacity as a developer, and again, have been really successful in the last few years. They're also interested in mentoring other organizations to help them, do similar, build, culturally connected, inclusive communities for their own population. So that's how kind of that partnership. I know they're looking at other models similar to this building in other municipalities already as well. So the building provides 96 affordable homes for both Indigenous and Swahili-speaking community members. And the name Moytel Lalem is actually really interesting. So it translates to help each other house. Because of kind of the synergies of the development partners, the City of New Westminster, who played a really key role in actually making this building possible in a reasonable timeline. And really this site was perfect for this kind of building. It's located, it used to be kind of 6 single detached lots, and will be bringing a lot of value into the neighborhood with kind of its shared spaces. So the building is a pretty typical kind of 6-story apartment building. We have a lot of these in Canada. We know how to build them pretty well. It's got a few step backs, recognizing kind of the single family neighborhood context, and kind of like some pretty well located amenity spaces as well. So they've got a really nice backyard area. They've got a garden starting to happen. These pictures are very early, kind of just from move-in, so there's not as much happening in the landscape as there will be in a couple of years. But they've got their really nice entrance, super inviting, has the artwork. You'll see kind of in that plan that it's not the most clear, but they've got these kind of well-located mailboxes in their lobby that are next to this really big common amenity that opens up into this outdoor backyard. So they really kind of maximize the co-location aspects of their amenity spaces to make this really a community hub. And what was really interesting was to hear from Luma about kind of the types of programming that they're planning to do in this common space. So things like drumming ceremonies, lots of events involving food, and they have a really great space for it. So yeah, we're excited to see how the programming piece evolves in this building as well. So just some early photos of the outdoor area. So they've got this big covered area near the common space, and then a little lawn, community garden. So I'm sure the space will kind of evolve as the building gets occupied as well. And yeah, I mean, it's an affordable housing building, so they were pretty budget conscious, but they were able to include some really nice little cultural details. So you'll see the kind of floor tiles that have some different Swahili greetings, as well as some Indigenous artwork incorporated into it. The main kind of art piece along the front facade here was really about welcoming and kind of letting people know in the community that this building is a really special place and a space that is really celebrating the culture of these two different groups. So some of the kind of key learnings that I wanted to share about the project, and we will be publishing all these case studies that I've been talking about after the fact in kind of a longer version. So you'll be able to see more information. It's always hard to compress it into a presentation. But some of the kind of key learnings that are relevant for today. So first, strong policies and project champions can significantly impact outcomes. Funding these buildings often requires partnerships, and this is really the case in this project. Social connection and inclusion are shaped through the process, not just reflected in the final design. And that was kind of like a light bulb moment for me when I was listening to Luma talk, which was like the kind of joy and connection that they brought through the development process. And I think that is just as valid a way to build social connection as thinking of like, I'm going to design these types of spaces, but that kind of like community building, and it's kind of the same when we look at co-housing, is like, it really is in the process where that social connection and those connections start to emerge. And the fourth is really about community opposition. So I'll tell you a little bit about what happened with this building, but that well-being and kind of social connection can be really positive frames to shift community perspectives. So first, to talk about kind of the policy context of this project. So what really helped was that the City of New Westminster had these nuggets in their strategic plan, which was affordable housing and reconciliation as priority areas. And that was really strongly supported by council and the city staff. So because of this, they were able to quickly approve an OCP amendment and rezoning to support affordable housing on this site. The site also contained some heritage houses, which typically would have had to go through a kind of heritage board review and process, which would have probably slowed down the project. However, because of these goals of reconciliation, which were deemed to be kind of more important than heritage preservation of these 6 single-family homes, they kind of recommended against on-site retention as an act of reconciliation, reflecting that these homes were reflected in kind of a colonial history, and that this housing was really for Indigenous people. And Luma has been able to shift that narrative in a few of their projects to think about, you know, what history are we actually preserving, and you know, if this housing is so critical and an act of reconciliation, how can we prioritize it? So again, the project was not referred to the Community Heritage Commission, but they did, the city staff did work to make the houses available for private relocation. So again, because of the kind of strong support from councillors and city staff, and we got to hear a neuromedic who was one of the planners at NUS talk about, you know, how they really saw this project. They really wanted to push it through and streamline it. So they were really, you know, assigned staff to champion it internally. So they facilitated work with engineering, which can sometimes, you know, slow down the process. The project was approved 3 times faster than comparable developments in the region, which is huge, because approval times are a big challenge in our area. And just recognizing the urgent need for affordable housing. At the end of the day, this is a 6-story apartment building. It's nothing crazy in terms of its form. So there is really no reason why we need to be delaying you know, building these buildings, especially when there is such a strong intention and team who is going to be like operating this building as a community hub. So yeah, unanimous approval by council, which was really great to see. So in terms of actually making this project happen, it really required these partnerships. So 3 levels of government funded the building, CMHC, BC Housing, and the City of New West also contributed a little bit. So the Aboriginal Land Trust was really kind of the key player in kind of getting the CMHC funding, the BC Housing Community Housing Fund, and getting all those major capital contributions aligned. And then BC Housing was also involved. So when we kind of talk about these projects and see that there are all these levels of government working together, it's really important to think about how requirements for amenity spaces, for example, are aligning or not aligning between different layers of policy. And I'll talk a little bit about that in my next section. And really the municipal contribution was this like championing the building and kind of fast tracking it through approval, advocating for funding resources with BC Housing and CMHC, reducing some of the offsite streetscape improvement requirements, some granting for kind of the offsite services, which can be a big challenge for some affordable housing developments. And then this kind of like not requiring retention or relocation. So they kind of cleared some of the red tape that normally can slow down development. So third learning is kind of this idea that social connection and inclusion are shaped through the process, not just reflected in the final design. So when we had the pleasure of hearing from the project team in our last cohort where we had the in-person workshops with municipalities, we had Dave Ford, who's the CEO of Luma, Kimani Jeffrey, who's from Swahili Vision, and Barb Lawson-Swain, who is one of the kind of leaders in doing all the programming at the Luma buildings. We were just like, everyone in the room was so deeply moved by kind of the joy and the values that were reflected in their work and how they talked about the work. And I think that is so important because at the end of the day, we are creating these community spaces. And when we kind of approach it with this openness, I think it brings us a long way to kind of building these types of spaces that we really want. And they kind of prioritize relationship building through the process, especially in the way that they worked with the city. And again, this is the art piece that I was talking about. So this is a 4-story metal art sculpture, which is really kind of celebrating what is happening on the interior of the building, even though it looks kind of like a typical 6-story building otherwise. And in addition, I think the City of New Westminster is doing a lot of really interesting things in terms of community representation and talking to community. So, for example, they made room for Indigenous voices to be represented during the public hearing. And they also kind of met with community representatives to understand, how critical this building was for the community. Sorry, I'm still battling a little bit of a cold, so apologies for the throat clearing. And then fourth was really that this idea that community opposition can be addressed. It is a really big challenge still. BC has cleared a lot of barriers or kind of red tape around this already. But what we do find in a lot of our work with municipalities is that well-being and social connection can be really positive frames to, push projects forward and shift perspectives. So Moytel Lalem received a record-breaking number of support letters, which countered the over 1,000 signatures that were opposing the OCP amendment and kind of wanted to block this building from getting built. As Hugh Forster, and you can watch him talk about this in the video, he talked about, so he said kind of the finest things that were said about this project were written by people who had sent in hundreds of letters against it. So, one of the examples of the letters was, someone was saying, we think affordable housing is an awesome idea. We think reconciliation should happen. We like the idea of embracing the Swahili community. But then the second paragraph was, but we don't want to build it here. So it just kind of highlights, some of this opposition, which, when we do kind of talk to community after the projects are built, I'm sure most of the neighbors who did oppose this building are actually fine with it now. And we found the same in our work with the temporary modular housing project. Um, so it's this idea that our public process has largely been shaped by this vocal minority who come out and oppose projects and have the time to speak up against projects. But by kind of reframing how we think about this, we can kind of see that they are just the minority. And again, city staff created space for Indigenous peoples to tell their stories to council, which I think went a long way for this kind of unanimous approval, despite the community opposition. And yeah, the unanimous kind of vote of approval really speaks for itself. BC has done a lot of policy shifts. This kind of six-story building will no longer need an OCP amendment in New Westminster, which is really great. But it is something to think about in your own area, which is like, this is a great site located next to a school and a community center. So why isn't it a good site for a six-story building that's going to be operated by a really great organization? They're going to be inviting community members in to use their spaces. So how do we kind of reframe that? And I think Ryan is going to link to Renovate the Public Hearing, which is a really great project out of the Center for Dialogue as well. And they've done some really good thinking around how we can kind of reframe this process. Yeah, okay, so that's all I will share about Moytel Lalem for now. As I said, we'll kind of write up the case study and definitely encourage you to check out the talk by Kent and Hugh from 2022.